the wooden walls that made Rome master of the Mediterranean. From nimble scout ships to massive floating fortresses, every vessel told the story of how a land power conquered the seas. These ships didn't just transport legions. They transformed Rome from a regional power into an empire that controlled every coastline from Gibraltar to Egypt. This is every Roman naval vessel that ruled the ancient waves. War galleys. Let's begin with the backbone of Roman naval power. The war galleys. Trireme, the workhorse that Rome borrowed and perfected. This three-banked oared warship carried 170 rowers and 30 marines, striking the perfect balance between speed and combat power. Rome adopted the design from Greek city-states and deployed it by the hundreds during the Punic Wars. The trireme's bronze ram could shatter enemy hulls with devastating effect, making it the destroyer of the ancient world. Though eventually superseded by larger designs, it remained in service for over 4 centuries. Quadrireme, the heavy hitter that bridged the gap between speed and firepower. Introduced during the First Punic War, this 4-banked galley carried more marines than a trireme while maintaining formidable ramming capability. Roman engineers experimented with different rowing configurations, some using 4 men per or rather than 4 banks. It served as the standard ship of the line during Rome's rise to naval supremacy. Production numbers reached into the thousands as Rome built the largest navy the ancient world had ever seen. Quinquereme, the legendary flagship class that dominated Mediterranean warfare. This massive 5-banked warship became Rome's answer to Carthaginian naval power, carrying up to 300 rowers and 120 marines. At Nile in 260 BC, Rome deployed its first fleet of quinqueremes, stunning Carthage with vessels built in just 60 days. The Quinquereme's enormous deck space made it the ideal platform for Rome's secret weapon, the corvus boarding bridge. These ships formed the core of every major Roman fleet for 2 centuries. Hexareme, the rare super-heavy that pushed galley design to its limits. With 6 banks of oars or multiple rowers per oar, this colossal warship served as a command vessel and floating fortress. Only the wealthiest naval powers could afford to build and crew these giants. Rome deployed hexaremes during critical battles, using their intimidating presence and massive marine complements to dominate enemy formations. The complexity and cost meant they never became standard, but when they appeared, they commanded respect. Light warships, moving on to the fast attack craft that hunted pirates and screened the battle fleet. Liburnian, the sleek patrol ship that became Rome's favorite. Originally a pirate vessel from Illyria, Rome captured the design and mass-produced it for coastal defense and anti-piracy operations. Lighter and faster than triremes, the Liburnian used 2 banks of oars and carried 50 to 80 men. Augustus revolutionized his fleet by making Liburnians the new standard, proving that speed and maneuverability trumped raw size. At Actium in 31 BC, Agrippa's Liburnian squadrons outmaneuvered and destroyed Mark Antony's Quinqueremes. They remained Rome's primary warship throughout the imperial period. Bireme, the early lightweight that started Rome's naval journey. With just 2 banks of oars, this smaller galley carried approximately 80 rowers and 20 marines. Rome's first warships were biremes, copied from Greek designs when naval warfare was still a mystery to the land-focused Romans. Though eventually replaced by larger vessels, biremes continued serving in rivers and coastal waters where their shallow draft proved invaluable. They patrolled the Danube and Rhine, keeping Germanic tribes from crossing into Roman territory. Lembos, the tiny raiding craft that Illyrian pirates made infamous. These small, fast vessels carried 20 to 50 men and excelled at hit-and-run attacks. Rome initially fought against lemboi used by pirates, then adopted them for special operations and river warfare. Their shallow draft allowed them to beach anywhere and retreat before enemy fleets could respond. Roman commanders used them for reconnaissance, raids behind enemy lines, and amphibious assaults on coastal settlements. Hemiolia, the hybrid design that combined oars and speed. This vessel featured 1.5 banks of oars, giving it its Greek name meaning 1.5. Pirates and coastal raiders favored the Hemiolia for its ability to overtake merchant ships while remaining nimble enough to escape warships. Rome captured numerous examples and pressed them into service as scouts and dispatch boats. They proved particularly effective in the Aegean, where island-hopping tactics required speed over firepower. Roman innovations. Next on the list, the technological breakthroughs that turned landlubbers into naval victors. Corvus-equipped Quinquereme, the game-changing innovation that made Rome unstoppable at sea. The corvus, or raven, was a boarding bridge mounted on the bow with a heavy spike that crashed down onto enemy decks. This brilliant device transformed naval battles into infantry fights, where Rome's superior legionaries dominated. At Nile, the corvus shocked Carthaginian admirals as their skilled sailors were butchered by Roman marines. Rome built over 300 corvus-equipped ships during the First Punic War. The device eventually fell out of favor because it made ships top-heavy in rough seas, but it had already won Rome control of the Mediterranean. Artillery platforms. The floating siege engines that brought land warfare to sea. Roman engineers mounted ballistae, catapults, and even small onagers onto reinforced quinqueremes and hexaremes. These ships stayed back from melee combat, raining bolts and stones onto enemy vessels. During sieges of coastal cities, artillery ships provided fire support for landing troops. The sight of flaming projectiles arcing from Roman ships struck terror into defenders. Julius Caesar deployed artillery ships during his campaigns in Gaul and Britain, using them to suppress enemy positions before amphibious landings. Sambuca ships, the specialized siege vessels that made Roman amphibious assaults devastating. The sambuca was a massive scaling ladder mounted on paired ships, used to assault city walls from the water. When the ships approached the wall, the ladder was raised by pulleys and dropped onto the fortifications. Marines then stormed up the ladder while archers provided covering fire from below. Syracuse learned to fear these machines during the Second Punic War, though Archimedes's defensive innovations destroyed several. The complexity meant sambuca ships were rare, reserved for critical sieges. Draman precursors, the experimental designs that pointed toward the future. In the late Empire, Roman naval architects began experimenting with lighter, faster galleys that used Greek fire and different sail configurations. These vessels featured reinforced bows for ramming and elevated fighting platforms. Though the true Draman wouldn't emerge until the Byzantine era, late Roman designers laid the groundwork. Some featured primitive flamethrowers using pitch and oil. Others experimented with multiple masts for better sailing performance. Transport and support vessels. Let's look at the unglamorous but essential ships that kept the legions supplied and moving. Navis honoraria, the heavy merchant that was Rome's true workhorse. These broad-beamed cargo ships carried grain, weapons, building materials, and trade goods across the empire. With capacities reaching 400 tons or more, they featured rounded hulls and relied primarily on sails rather than oars. The grain fleet that fed Rome consisted almost entirely of honoraria, making annual voyages from Egypt with thousands of tons of wheat. Without these ships, Roman cities would have starved and legions would have fought without supplies. They weren't glamorous, but they were the backbone of Roman logistics. Horse transport, hippogogos, the specialized carriers that moved cavalry across the Mediterranean. These vessels featured wide, stable hulls and reinforced decks to support the weight of horses and their equipment. Side doors or ramps allowed horses to board and disembark without using cranes. Roman cavalry raids in North Africa and Spain depended on these ships to move mounted units quickly. During the Jewish revolt, horse transports enabled rapid redeployment of cavalry from Syria to Judea. Some could carry up to 30 horses along with their riders and supplies. Supply ships, navis actuaria, the medium-sized transports that kept fleets operational. These vessels fell between warships and merchant ships in size and capability. They used both oars and sails, allowing them to keep pace with battle fleets while carrying food, water, weapons, and spare equipment. Every major naval expedition included dozens of supply ships. During Trajan's Dacian Wars, supply ships navigated the Danube to keep forward bases stocked. Their crews included carpenters, sailmakers, and armorers who could repair battle damage at sea. Water carriers, navis aquaria, the essential vessels that solved the ancient navy's greatest challenge. Fresh water. Roman fleets operating far from friendly ports needed constant water resupply for thousands of rowers and marines. Water carriers featured large clay amphorae or lead-line tanks that could store water for weeks. They accompanied every major fleet operation, making extended campaigns possible. During the siege of Syracuse, water carriers kept the Roman fleet supplied for over 2 years. Without them, naval blockades would have been impossible. Hospital ships. The mercy vessels that treated wounded sailors and marines. These converted merchant ships featured medical facilities, storage for supplies, and bunks for injured men. Roman military medicine was surprisingly advanced, and naval surgeons achieved remarkable survival rates for the era. Hospital ships evacuated wounded from battle zones and provided care during transport back to major ports. They also served as quarantine vessels when disease struck a fleet. The presence of medical support improved morale, as sailors knew they wouldn't be abandoned if injured. Regional specialists. Continuing with the specialized designs adapted for specific waters and missions. Nile River patrol boats, the shallow draft vessels that controlled Egypt's lifeblood. These small galleys featured flat bottoms and could operate in just a few feet of water. Rome stationed flotillas along the Nile to suppress banditry, collect taxes, and move troops quickly. Their design borrowed from ancient Egyptian traditions, proving Rome's willingness to adapt local expertise. During the Jewish revolt, Titus used Nile patrol boats brought overland to control the Sea of Galilee. They remained in service for centuries, barely changing from pharaonic designs. Rhine and Danube gunboats, the frontier warships that patrolled Rome's northern borders. These sturdy vessels combined elements of Celtic and Roman design, featuring reinforced hulls to handle river ice and currents. They carried ballistae for shore bombardment and enough marines to respond to Germanic raids. Archaeological evidence from Germany shows these ships featured innovative construction techniques. During the Marcomannic Wars, Danube flotillas provided mobile artillery support for legion camps. Their presence prevented barbarian tribes from freely crossing the rivers. Red Sea patrol ships, the specialized vessels that secured the trade routes to India. Operating in the hot, coral-filled waters of the Red Sea required ships that could handle different conditions than Mediterranean galleys. These ships featured copper sheathing to prevent marine growth and used Indian Ocean sailing techniques. They protected merchant ships carrying spices, silk, and precious stones from Arabian pirates. Roman control of Red Sea trade brought enormous wealth to the empire. The patrol ships also served as customs vessels, ensuring the emperor got his share of luxury imports. Black Sea galleys, the reinforced warships that operated in rougher northern waters. The Black Sea's unpredictable weather and barbarian naval raiders required tougher ships than Mediterranean warfare. These galleys featured higher sides, stronger construction, and better sailing capabilities. They protected the grain ships bringing wheat from the Crimea to feed Constantinople. During winter, they were hauled ashore to avoid ice damage. The Classis Pontica, the Black Sea Fleet, maintained dozens of these specialized vessels. Reconnaissance and communications. Next on the list, the swift vessels that carried messages and scouted enemy positions. Scaphi, the dispatch boats that kept Rome's far-flung fleets connected. These small, fast vessels carried messages between fleet elements and from sea to shore. With just 10 to 20 oars, they were nimble enough to slip past enemy blockades. During the civil wars, both Caesar and Pompey relied on Scaphi to coordinate their scattered naval forces. They also served as officer transports, carrying admirals between ships for councils of war. Their speed made them invaluable for reporting enemy movements. Speculatoria, the scout ships that were the eyes of the fleet. Faster and smaller than Liburnians, these vessels ventured ahead of the main fleet to locate enemy forces. They carried skilled navigators and observers who could estimate enemy strength and intentions. During night operations, Speculatoria used signal fires and flags to communicate back to the fleet. Their crews were considered elite, as capture meant certain death. Rome stationed permanent Speculatoria squadrons at major naval bases to provide early warning of enemy movements. Vasili, the small boats carried aboard larger warships. Named after a Greek city known for small craft, These vessels served as ship's boats for quinqueremes and larger galleys. They ferried officers to shore, retrieved fresh water, and rescued sailors from damaged ships. During battles, crews sometimes used phasili to tow damaged vessels out of the combat zone. Every major warship carried 1 or 2 phasili, making them ubiquitous throughout the Roman navy. Amphibious warfare. Moving on to the specialized vessels designed for the most dangerous naval mission. Putting soldiers ashore against opposition. Landing craft. The flat-bottomed boats that invented amphibious assault. These vessels featured drop-down ramps or pivoting bows that allowed legionaries to rush ashore in formation. Julius Caesar pioneered their use during the invasion of Britain, where tides and beaches required specialized designs. The crews included expert pilots who could read beaches and find the best landing spots. Later emperors standardized landing craft design, creating the template for amphibious operations. They carried 30 to 40 fully equipped soldiers plus equipment. Artillery barges. The stable platforms that provided fire support for landings. These wide, flat vessels couldn't move quickly but provided a steady base for ballistae and catapults. During amphibious assaults, they approached the beach and bombarded defenders while landing craft deposited troops. The psychological effect of artillery fire from the sea was devastating to primitive forces. Caesar used artillery barges extensively in Gaul, where coastal tribes had no experience with naval bombardment. Their presence forced defenders away from beaches, allowing unopposed landings. Pontoon ships, the engineering vessels that built bridges across rivers and straits. These specially designed craft carried prefabricated bridge sections and the equipment to deploy them. Roman engineering corps could construct a floating bridge across major rivers in a single day using pontoon ships. During the Dacian Wars, pontoon bridges allowed legions to cross the Danube despite enemy opposition. The ships remained stationed near the bridge to provide stability and allow adjustments for current and wind. This capability gave Rome unmatched strategic mobility. Late Empire developments. Let's look at the final evolution of Roman naval power as the empire transformed. Drummond prototypes. The faster, lighter warships that emerged in the 4th and 5th centuries. As naval warfare evolved, Rome developed vessels that relied more on speed and missile weapons than ramming and boarding. These ships featured 2 masts for better sailing, Greek fire projectors, and elevated fighting platforms. Though still called Liburnians officially, they represented a distinct evolution. The Byzantine navy would perfect these designs into the famous dromons that dominated medieval Mediterranean warfare. Archaeological evidence from this period shows increasingly sophisticated construction techniques. Armed merchant conversions. The desperate expedient of the late empire. As the treasury emptied and shipyards struggled, Rome began converting merchant ships into improvised warships. These vessels received reinforced decks, fighting towers, and complements of marines. They couldn't match purpose-built warships but provided numbers when the frontiers collapsed. During the Vandal invasions, converted merchants formed the majority of some defensive fleets. The practice demonstrated both Roman adaptability and the declining resources of the late empire. River monitors. The final development of Roman riverine warfare. These powerful, shallow-draft warships combined the best features of earlier designs with late Roman innovations. They featured armored sides to protect against arrows, artillery for shore bombardment, and elite marine detachments. The Rhine and Danube monitors represented the pinnacle of Roman river naval warfare. They couldn't stop the barbarian migrations, but they made river crossings costly. Archaeological evidence shows these sophisticated vessels remained in service into the 6th century. From towering quinqueremes to nimble Liburnians, from corvus-equipped boarding machines to specialized transports, these wooden vessels built and sustained the Roman Empire. Each design represented centuries of naval evolution, borrowed wisdom from conquered peoples, and Roman engineering brilliance. They carried legions across the Mediterranean, hunted pirates from Gibraltar to the Black Sea, and made Mare Nostrum more than just a boast. So which vessel did you know about?